How do we really inculcate that culture of human rights, whether it be theologically speaking, whether it be through policy, and whether it be through the arts? How do we shape our community, our society, and us as American Muslims?
I'm Mitch.
And I'm Missy.
We're co-workers.
He's the boss, and we're married.
And she's the boss. Together, we host Good Faith Weekly, a podcast on faith and culture.
What could possibly go wrong?
Tune in and find out. Missy. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and then you're going to get to hear all about her grievances regarding our travel experiences. Later on the pod, we sat down with an incredible guest. Ani Zonneveld is the founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values. It is a wonderful conversation that you are not going to want to miss. It's a great episode, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, I mean, I'm a little frustrated. I'm not going to lie.
All right. So I'm sure our audience is waiting with bated breath.
So first, my apologies to our listeners. But you remember, a while back, I think I mentioned a couple of times that I felt like having... telling stories of our travel woes is a little like forcing,
right?
Is the podcast listeners' version of having to look through our vacation photos, sure. Right? Okay, so kind of decided to stop doing that for a while, in part because of that, but also because I understand this is such first world problems. However, I've now collected a few.
You have some grievance. Is this the airing of the grievance?
This is the airing of the grievances, the pet peeves, my new campaign platforms. If you've been with us for a while, you know that I have campaign platforms, and I'm just adding to the list.
Okay. Well, I can't wait to hear the list.
Here goes.
Number one.
We had something happen this week while we were traveling. This is not necessarily an inconvenience, although it could be.
Yeah.
But just a bizarre situation.
Okay. Do tell.
So we board an airplane.
Yes.
And we sit there on the tarmac or, at the gate for a while, which, is not unusual, whatever. Right. But it got to be a little long. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if it was the pilot or the flight attendant finally came on and said, all right, we're going to leave, but the blue juice isn't working.
I forgot. That seems like so long ago.
Right?
I forgot about the blue juice.
It was 48 hours ago, Mitch. Okay. So blue juice, for those of you who do not know, is apparently what
this is not a sports drink.
No. Or, I don't know. It depends. Is the stuff that comes up in an airplane toilet.
Yes. So
they could not get the blue juice to work in the airplane bathrooms.
This is so bizarre, not your retaining.
I know. So they told us, we're going to go ahead and leave. But if you need to use the toilet, you have to take your own water.
Couldn't be fizzy water. Had to be regular water.
So if you need to go to the bathroom, I'm sorry, but you got to have a water bottle and pour it in the toilet before you go to the bathroom and flush. So that was a new one on us.
That definitely was at first.
It reminded me of the time, I'm not sure if we told this story on the pod, but we were sitting on an airplane, and this is the era of pilots and flight attendants timing out because of so many delays and things that you're thinking you're going to get to leave to go somewhere, and then you only to find out the crew, because there's been such a long delay, has timed out.
Correct.
And you're stuck. This has happened to us numerous times now. So we're on an airplane one time, and I think something like that happened. And so basically some guy in the cabin who's literally like in his Tommy Bahama shirt and khaki shorts.
I forgot about that too.
Cargo shorts. Yeah. He's like,
we don't know if he had his pilot license or not.
He was a pilot. And so they like asked, Joe Schmo to come fly the plane. And he did and got us home. And that was lovely.
He was running herbs between,
Probably. So anyways, these are a couple of bizarre experiences. But now that we're on a roll, I'm also going to talk about a couple of other things.
Okay, grievance number 2.
So the other one, and this is a PSA for everyone who travels. If your child is playing a video game on your tablet or their tablet, and that video game is annoying you, putting in your own AirPods to block the noise does not
help everybody else.
In fact, block it for the rest of the passengers.
Okay.
PSA.
Yeah.
Okay, I've been saving that one for a while, haven't I? That's like a couple months old. Okay, so then that brings us to tonight's grievance.
Grievance number 3.
You guys, hotel bathroom. Well, you know what? Not hotel bathroom. Any bathrooms.
So this is universal.
Universal.
Okay, universal. All right.
The fact that I have to say this is bizarre. Bathrooms need actual doors.
You don't like saloon doors?
And I mean like opaque doors, wooden, metal, whatever, but doors that shut and latch and have a lock. Mm-hmm. But what we're finding is that many hotels think that people want these frosted glass doors that slide and have no latch.
You know who I blame for this?
Who?
Chip and Joanna Gaines.
Oh, you're right.
It always goes back
because
to me,
they love the barn door.
They love the barn door. Love the barn door.
Right, but the barn door
I do think that they actually have barn doors.
They're not frosted glass. But you guys, you're in a hotel room. It's like you need a little moment of privacy. So, in any case.
And check Missy's socials out if you're wanting to see a photo of this barn door.
Yeah, there's photo proof happening on my socials. So if you want to check those out, you can. But it's just, I will die on this hill, you guys. Hotels need actual bathroom doors.
Right.
I don't feel like that's too much to ask. So my apologies for sharing all of these first world problems. Yes, I know they're first world problems, but man, I feel better.
Well, I'm so glad.
Thank you for
the bottom line is,
me.
What you're telling us tonight are 3 things. 1, if you're going to travel in the next few weeks, 1, bring your own bottled water.
You might need a bottle of water to go to the bathroom. I'm just saying.
Exactly.
On the airplane.
2, bring your kids some headphones or bring earplugs for the entire plane.
Right. Actually, just make them mute the video game they're playing.
Yeah.
There's that.
Yeah. And then thirdly, of course, either find a hotel that's got a real bathroom door or bring a sheet to cover the door.
Well, a sheet's not going to help. You want to be able to like close and latch a door when you're in. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm.
Oh, I think you're going to get a lot of positive feedback from that one.
So far I am. I'm just saying. So, anyways.
Well, yeah. Well, we are in South Carolina, having a great week, traveling around the state. Beautiful, beautiful country. Incredible people. And just having a great time. But so stay tuned for some more travel woes because we're not home yet.
Right. This may carry over into next week.
Grievance 4 and 5 coming your way.
My apologies. Hopefully not.
But you and I got to sit down this week with just a delightful leader in the Islamic faith, Ani Zonneveld, who is the president of the Muslims for Progressive Values. Was just wonderful.
I feel like that needs and deserves another mention. Muslims for Progressive Values.
Yeah. It's kind of like Baptists for Progressive Values.
Right. And I feel like that is something that I'm embarrassed that I did not know existed before this. But this was a fascinating conversation with her.
Yes.
I learned some things that I'm also embarrassed to say kind of blew my mind. And I don't know why, because I know that we in our faith tradition and also in our denomination have had many assumptions, about what we believe or practice that are inaccurate. And in this interview, Ani talks about her work, but also some key things that have been misinterpreted in her faith. And so I found this conversation fascinating. I look forward to keeping up with her work. I look forward to kind of talking a little bit about the interview after the fact.
Yep. So stay tuned. Missy and I sat down with Ani Zonneveld, who is the president of Muslims for Progressive Values.
You know, Missy, I really enjoy recording this podcast with you each and every week.
Do you?
Well, but this is not the only thing we do at Good Faith Media.
It's not. We have so many offerings for you. We have a plethora of podcasts, videos, news and opinion articles, Bible studies, books, and much, much more. Find us at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Ani Zonneveld is a writer, singer-songwriter, founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values, an international human rights organization that advocates for social justice and the equality for all, a strong supporter of freedom of expression and of conscience, women's rights, and as an ally, LGBTQ rights. Good Faith Media will attend the Muslims for Progressive Values 2023 conference in New York City at Union Theological Seminary on September 30th. Ani, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Ani, MPV's mission is to advocate for human rights, social justice, and inclusion in the United States and around the world by inculcating a culture rooted in human rights through public education, advocacy, and the arts. So, Ani, I want to start with talking about a little bit of history with Muslims and human rights and social justice. Many Christians in the United States, you might be surprised to learn, don't really associate the Muslim faith with human rights and social justice. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about theologically and historically about Muslims and these issues.
Well, actually, it's not just the Christians. The Muslims also have a problem. There's been many occasions where I speak and I put Islam and human rights in the first sentence, and the first people who would just to throw it back in my face are Muslims. Like, how dare you use Islam and human rights in the first sentence? And obviously, this is coming from extremely secular feminists, and I understand that because they've been. Their Islam, or the Islam that they were raised on, was very harmful. And I think when you are raised in a faith tradition that is detrimental to your mental health and your well-being, regardless of religion, you will have an aversion to faith. And I totally get that. I was not raised that way. I was raised at a very egalitarian and empowering family dynamic where my father was the feminist. And so my Islam is very different than what many people experience. And I think the Islam I was raised on in Malaysia is truer to the spirit of the teaching of Islam. So to answer your question, the brief history, the founding Islam with the revelation of the text of the Quran was in direct response to the misogynistic and the tribal and the patriarchy and violent system of the day. It was incredibly violent. And so when the first verses of the Quran was revealed through Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, who spoke to Prophet Muhammad, it's the same angel Gabriel that you have in Christianity, by the way, FYI, the same character.
I don't know, is it the same last name?
Same address. When the verses were revealed, it was really in direct response to the situation, the social issues of the day. So that's why the first converts to Islam were the slaves and whoever were oppressed and women. And if it wasn't for the fact that the Quran actually spoke to them, then they would not have converted. So the first converts were those who were oppressed. It was not obviously the tribal patriarchs, right? Obviously, because they had a lot to lose.
Right.
And so, the basic rights that we are still struggling, particularly in the Muslim world, like the right to inheritance, the right to work outside the home, the right to full bodily autonomy, all that good stuff, that all is in the Quran, revealed 1400 years ago, but for whatever reason we're still fighting for those basic rights. And so that's why for us it's very easy. You have 1400 years of Islam. There's the good part and there's the ugly part. The ugly one has dominated. The patriarchal, misogynistic, the homophobic parts have dominated and has defined Islam as it is. Whereas for me and the slew of progressive Muslims in this world, we look at Islam as being the egalitarian, the social justice movement that it was intended to be.
When you were talking about when you grow up in a faith tradition that's harmful, how it's so difficult to then come back and want to see the good that comes out of it. I think that's just so relatable for, like you were saying, in your faith and also in the Christian faith. And some of these issues you're talking about the early converts being those who were oppressed and marginalized, not those in power. It's all such a parallel and just amazing when we start to take a step back and look at all these things that are similar, how much of it is really.
I mean, are you trying to tell me that, like, in our tradition, Jesus wasn't a politician? You're trying to tell me that he was a poor day laborer?
I don't know. I've heard that. There's a rumor going around.
And then, the sad thing is that in within the Muslim community, those who are extremely secular and very negative towards Islam, particularly the work that we do as Muslims and in the context of human rights, they have bought the narrative of Islam being homophobic, misogynistic, and patriarchy, and they can't actually unhinge or untangle the two. Their cultural upbringing that has been framed within the context of Islam, which is false, and the true teachings of the Quran, right? And these are very intelligent people. They're not, they're critical thinkers, and yet it's very hard for them to actually untangle the two and to look at Islam from a pure spiritual social justice path versus the Islam that has been bastardized in the culture from which they were raised in. And that bastardization was basically framed as being Islam when it has nothing to do with Islam.
Earlier, you mentioned that the term progressive, and I want to talk a little bit about that because those of us in Good Faith Media, and Missy and I in particular, we come from not only the Christian tradition, but from the Baptist tradition within Christianity. And if there are two terms that seem at odds with one another, it is the term progressive and Baptist. But believe it or not, that they are out there, and we are two of them. You and I met at the Parliament of the World's Religions, and it was interesting to me to talk to you and to others at the Parliament about these common values we have. And it seems as though this term progressive continued to bubble up in my conversations. So could you talk more about the progressive movement within Islam and how that relates to the larger progressive movement across faiths?
Okay, so I think the best way is to give an example. When we say progressive, well, first let me backtrack for a minute. So when we started this organization, we called it Muslims for Progressive Values. And many, many years later, a rabbi friend of mine, after understanding the work that we do and understanding Islam better, he says, Ani, you made a mistake when you called it Muslims for Progressive Values. You should have said Muslims for Traditional Values. And I was like, oh man, oh, what a mess up. It is so true.
I think that might have been interpreted differently, though, depending on who's reading.
Yeah, of course it would have been. Now, as we're 16 years old, we can look at it and says, yeah, you know what, we could have maybe rebranded that way, for example. But no, but as a startup, it was important for us to really define ourselves as progressive values. So to give you an example, nowadays, when Christmas comes along, when you look at the social media from where I'm standing, you'll see, the youngsters pastors actually asking questions. Oh, can I wish my Christian neighbor Merry Christmas? And the radical imams would basically say, no, if you wish them Merry Christmas, that means you support their religion and you will go to hell, right? And so let me give you an example from Prophet Muhammad. He has a covenant with the Christians from Egypt and from various tribes. And the covenant with his signature basically states that we have to protect the Christians, we have to protect their places of worship, and we do that until the end of time. That's a very different example than this 21st century imams that we have that are really loudmouth and that are really propagating the wrong kind of Islam. So that's just one example how progressive and inclusive Prophet Muhammad was, and how he was the human example of the teachings of the Quran, right? So the Quran is the text. Prophet Muhammad was living out that text in person.
That's a great example.
So tell us more about what kind of ways that MPV advocates for the causes and for these issues. So talk about boots on the ground. What are some things that you do?
Yeah. So let's talk about something really urgent right now that's happening in the United States, and how there is this movement that is led by the Muslim right. It's not just the Christian right. There's a Muslim right. There's a Hindu right. There's all kinds of, the right wingers within our faith traditions. And anyway, the Muslim right have been spearheading this movement of opting out and condemning the inclusive curriculums in public schools. Now in Maryland, what they've done is they've sued the Board of Education. They just lost, but basically they wanted to opt out of an inclusive curriculum that depicted same-sex parents, but that also depicted, Muslim girls in hijab, which I don't agree with, but it was very inclusive in that it depicted our society at large in a very inclusive manner. And so the work that we've been doing now is basically to push back against that what we call a very radical narrative, to say for us as American Muslims, we all need to learn from the same textbooks. Otherwise, we will not have a functioning society and a democratic one. We have to be inclusive of all of us. We are all citizens of America. We all need to be respected that way. If we're going to be opting out of it, we're not going to be raised in the set of values that is inclusive of other Americans who don't look like us, that don't practice the same faith as us and same sex as us, etc. Right? And so that's sort of like what we're imbued in right now. We're like really being pulled from all different directions, and like, how do we address this? Particularly like the council members and the progressive politicians are coming to us, like, how do we address this issue and really counter the radical Muslim pivot to the right without making it sound like they are Islamophobic or racist, etc. Because a lot of those who are against the inclusive curriculum are the new immigrants to the United States.
You mentioned a few of the images that we get in our mind when we think of Islam, like you said, the hijabs and things like this that women wear. What issues like that, and you talked about bodily autonomy and some of these things, what issues do you find yourself having to answer more for? In our Baptist tradition, there's certain, people have certain assumptions about what, somebody from the Christian faith, and in particular from the Baptist denomination or Catholic or Methodist might believe, do, and not do. What are some of the most common questions that you get that you find yourself having to say, actually, that's not, really how I believe?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is the covering of the hair, the hijab. I remember, like in the beginning, especially soon after 9/11, there was, a plethora of interfaith gatherings and faith traditions coming together in support of Muslims that were being, criminalized for just being Muslim and suspect of being a terrorist just for being Muslim. And the first questions that I would always get, and not as much now, is, "Oh, you're Muslim?" Because, obviously I don't look whatever that look is supposed to be if you're a Muslim. And how come you're not wearing hijab? And so I always have to explain that the hijab is actually not a command. It is more of a cultural practice. So when the Quran was revealed, it was in a particular very tribal patriarchy society, right? So I've touched on that. Now, if you were of a particular tribe, women had to dress a certain way. So if you were a higher class, you could wear a scarf, you could cover your breasts, and the more covering you had, the higher hierarchy you were in a tribe. The lower class tribes could not dress like a higher class tribe. If you were found out to be of a lower class tribe dressing as a higher class tribe, you would be whipped in public. Okay, so and if you were a lower class tribe, you had to go your chest were you had to go bare the chest, women and men, right? Wow. So when the Quran was revealed, the Quran said, cover your bosom with a scarf. Now my head is not the bosom. My bosom is the bosom. And this is the beauty of the Quran, because what it's basically saying, regardless of what tribe you are, go ahead and cover your bosom.
Now, wow, that is fascinating.
Right?
Wow.
Nobody does
it's
this,
almost
right?
like people misinterpret scripture no matter what tradition you're part of and use it to their advantage.
And so
that's crazy. Wow.
Over the centuries, it became over the centuries, Muslim women didn't wear a headscarf. And the ones that were wearing the headscarf were the elite. It were not the people that were working the fields, the women that were working in farms, etc. Because like in Turkey, in the rural areas, like, it's not practical. We can't wear this stuff and be working the fields. So for centuries, women didn't do that. But now it's become, the narrative has changed so much, and we've been brainwashed to say, oh, no, if you're a Muslim woman, you should be wearing it. That's what was said centuries ago. And now it's like, no, you must be wearing it. And then Al-Azhar came out with a statement some years ago, says, no, if you don't wear it, they're an apostate. I mean, that's how far we've come. And that's what I call the bastardization of religion. And so then the other thing, if you're covered, that means you're fairer skin. Therefore, even till today, that colorism is an issue in many Muslim societies and others. The fairer you are, the more elite, the higher class you are. If you have not noticed, all the Hollywood movies, those that are stars, they have light color skin, they are more Euro looking. And but if you go to India, that is not representative of the general public.
Right.
Wow, so many universal truths to be gleaned.
Yes.
I'm just a little bit in awe.
Well, another
Where do we start, right?
I know, right?
I don't know.
Right.
We may be here all day.
Exactly. Well, another responsibility you have as the director is a lot of times you're advocating at the United Nations. So what are some of the issues that you are addressing now at the United Nations from a progressive Muslim vantage point?
So at the United Nations, we are one of the committee members of the Faith Advisory Council for the UN system. So it cuts across all the 27 agencies. I'm also the co-chair of the gender working group for that advisory council. And as a matter of fact, tomorrow I'll be co-chairing a very high level discussion on as a side event of the United Nations General Assembly. And it is on the subject matter of equality in law for women and girls by 2030, which is obviously not going to happen. But so that's one thing. We do a lot of work on filing reports against a lot of the human rights abuses in the name of Islam by Muslim majority countries. So for example, when some of these countries justify child forced marriages in the name of Islam, we negate that using Islamic texts as well. And so when there's human rights abuses against LGBT people, we do the same. Or the issue of freedom of religion and belief and apostasy and blasphemy laws. And this is such a huge human rights violation, and how people like me are accused of being an apostate because I claim to be Muslim, but according to them, I'm not really Muslim. And so, so I've gotten my share of threats in regards to this, particularly in the beginning, but not so much anymore. But the accusation of apostasy and blasphemy in Muslim majority countries of Muslims like me is really rampant. So if you are going to be critical of an interpretation of theology, you'll be accused of being an apostate and you'll be thrown in jail or punished or fined, what have you. And so it's really difficult to be progressive in many of the Muslim majority countries because you will be prosecuted. So we're always, defending a lot of these and highlighting and bringing up these cases of Muslims who are challenging the state definition of Islam, because the state definition of Islam is political Islam. Mm-hmm. It's to control how you think, how you practice, is to keep your citizenship in tow, right? It has nothing to do with your right to practice religion. And this, again, is another example of the bastardization of Islam, because the Quran in chapter 2, verse 256 clearly states there is no compulsion in faith. Another example of my experience at the United Nations is that is because we do a lot of advocacy for LGBTQ rights at the international fora, and we did and so sometimes I get these, Middle Eastern and Arab Muslim majority countries, Pakistan, come up to me and says, Ani, we really like your work, but we really have a problem with you supporting LGBTQ rights. I mean, why are you pushing this Western agenda? And I have to put a pause on that, and I say to them, it's like, hang on a second. I'm the one that's practicing Islam, and you're the one that's practicing the puritanical version of Christianity. Mm-hmm. Because if you go back to Islamic history, we did not discriminate against homosexuals. As a matter of fact, the Christian nations, the Brits, the France, the Italians came and conquered Muslim countries because they found us to be very homophobic friendly, and they conquered us as an excuse for money, but they conquered us saying that, we have to civilize the Muslim societies. That's actually in the history books.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so I say to them, you need to go back to your history before you come and talk to me about, supporting, this Western agenda. If anything, you're the one that's promoting the puritanical Christian agenda. And then they shut up after that.
I bet they really enjoy that critique, Ani. That's great.
I wish you could see their faces after asking that.
Well, we have learned so much here today. You've got a conference coming up on September 30th at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. We are going to be there. We're really excited about attending the conference this year. Can you tell our listeners more about the conference and how they can find out more about how they can actually participate?
Sure. The conference is going to address the issues of the coalescing of the Muslim right and the Christian right, and how that is really harmful to our democracy, and how people are, like the Muslim right, are basically learning from the Christian right on how to use Religious Freedom Restoration Act to justify their discrimination in the name of religion. And that's not what the RFRA, or Religious Freedom Restoration Act, was designed. So that was a law that was signed by Clinton, but it's become an abusive tool by the Christian and Muslim right. So we're going to be addressing that. We also have a guest speaker on the panel on this issue, Hindus for Human Rights. And so she's going to be speaking about it from the Hindu right, the issues that she has to do with the Hindu right. And so we're going to have sort of a strategy session from there. We're also going to address the space for LGBTQ Muslims in our community. And this is in a direct response of this very homophobic position statement that was signed by more than 200 imams, American imams, and some Canadian imams. And basically they're saying that they don't recognize the existence of LGBT Muslims and that they're not really Muslims, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very harmful position. And so we're going to address that. And the third one is going to be about the arts and how us American Muslims, how we have to create our own American Muslim identity through the arts, for example. So I'm going to be doing a presentation. I'm going to be a panelist because I'm going to showcase the songs that I've created, what I call Islamic hymns. And so what I've done is I've taken like passages from the Quran, Prophet Muhammad's favorite prayer, Rumi, and I've put it to classical music because I'm classically trained. And so, and then I've arranged the vocals in a choral arrangement, right? So it's very different than what the traditional Muslim spiritual songs are. And then there's going to be a visual artist, etc., a poet as well. And so we're MPV has always been sort of an avant-garde organization where we're really pushing the envelope forward. That's why we're progressive. Like, how do we really inculcate that culture of human rights, whether it be theologically speaking, whether it be through policy, and whether it be through the arts? How do we shape our community, our society, and us as American Muslims, and as part of the fabric of America? And that's our place. We're an American organization first.
So, Ani, how can our audience find out more about the conference? Is there still time to register for the conference?
Yes, you still have a lot of time to register, but please do so quickly. It's just go to our website, M as in Mary, P as in Peter, V as in Victor, USA.org, and the information will pop up.
Great.
Excellent. Well, Ani, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. I've learned so much and am now going to leave this interview and think of a bunch more questions. So we might have to have you back on.
Absolutely.
Just the education you've given us about your faith has been so invaluable. Thank you.
Thank you.
So before we let you go, we have one final question. As you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So in light of the work that you do in our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
So more to tell. I think you have to have me back. I have more to tell.
Wow, we've never had somebody do that. That is brilliantly played. I have more to tell as well. You're going to have me back to hear that.
I love that so much. We will. I'm going to come up with a list of just questions, like everything you needed to know, and you're going to help us out.
Well, Ani Zonneveld, thank you so much for being our guest at Good Faith Weekly this week. Make sure you check out their website at mpvusa.org. And if you got an opportunity or around New York, sign up for the conference. I'm really looking forward to attending. And Ani, you are welcome back anytime to this program.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, Missy. She was something else.
Well, you'll be glad to know I have fact-checked Ani and found out that angel Gabriel she mentioned did in fact have the same last name, so we can conclude it is the same angel Gabriel.
Was it Smith, Johnson?
No. But little things like that, for us who grew up, in such a bubble are, I'm embarrassed to admit, pretty mind-blowing,
right. And that's what is fascinating in my conversations, or our conversations with people like Ani and Ahmad and Chauncey before, have really educated us to the Muslim faith and what the Quran really has to say, not only about the Islamic faith, but just about how much our cultures are intertwined.
It's so silly to me. I don't know. Because as she's talking about misconceptions about her faith and faith tradition, and I don't know why it's so surprising, it shouldn't be, because there's all sorts of misconceptions about, our faith tradition or our denomination and what we believe, and what probably our listeners are not going to hear, because as I mentioned to her in the interview, which is probably cut, is that our media producer Cliff is in fact a magician, is that after every response she gave, I don't know if you noticed this, but there was a long pause.
We were like,
because I think
wow.
we were both just absorbing
the
information.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners feel that as well. But a couple of things that stood out to me is when she mentioned the state definition of Islam is about control.
Yep.
And then you think, okay, well, if you looked at our quote unquote state or government today and their definition of Christianity, or synonymously Christian nationalism, would that not translate to control?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
So there's the parallels there. And
I guess that's the most remarkable thing when we talk to our friends in other traditions, such as Ani and Rabbi Jack Moline in the Jewish faith, is that we learned very quickly that no matter the religion, that there are individuals out there in the world that use religion and manipulate religion in order to control people.
And the fact that she mentioned that the Muslim right is learning from our Christian
Religion,
right?
yeah. It's like,
I don't know. It's just so funny to me. And I do feel like I want to have her back. I want to have a recurring conversation with her because I feel like there's so much to be gleaned from the commonalities of what we are going through in our respective faith traditions in terms of political implications and consequences.
Right.
There's so much that we need to be working together on. But the other thing I found that just stood out to me, which was so funny, that she tells her Muslim cohorts that accuse her of not being traditional Muslim, and she's because of her advocacy for LGBTQ plus rights and women's rights and
Right.
not wearing the hijab and all these things. And she says, actually, your Christianity is showing.
That's exactly
Those
what
may
she
not
said.
be her words, but those are my words.
Those
And
are
I
so
really think that needs to be her next t-shirt. For
Christianity.
Muslims for progressive values. We need to make them a shirt that says your Christianity is showing. Because, she says, I'm practicing traditional values of Islam, which are that of inclusion and liberation, like with the misinterpretation of what it means to wear a hijab and how it was about class.
Right.
And we have examples in our own faith and
Oh my
culture
goodness, numerous examples
about that, and about how much of our religious practices have to do more with a class system than that of a liberation system, which, when you look at the root of things, Jesus was a liberator of people who were oppressed.
Well, you look at the totality of the Hebrew Christian Bible, and for example, to use one of her illustrations about the patriarch, you read the text and you see all these examples of strong female characters who were leaders within their time and within their place, and that the story is incomplete without their presence. Yahweh was working directly through these women, and these women were wise enough and smart enough, and were able to achieve incredible accomplishments because of who they were, but because of the patriarchy in especially the colonial world.
Careful, your Barbie is showing. Sorry.
Exactly. That those stories were subjugated to a secondary class, and those characters were subjugated to a secondary class in the overall narrative. But in reality, egalitarianism is all throughout Scripture. But in the hands of the patriarchy, it is perverted. And we see that not only in Christianity, but as she indicated, we see that as well in Islam. And of course, we also see it in Judaism as well. It doesn't matter what faith it is, Missy. When you get people who are looking to ascertain and keep power, they're going to use religion as a tool to acquire that power and to maintain that power.
I agree. I want us to maybe close with a story that you have talked about, and maybe some of our listeners may be familiar with, but I think it gives us an example and a foundation for a spirit of working together. I think if I learned anything from our interview with Ani, it is the fact that we, as what, would be labeled progressive Christians, but what you and I might call more traditional Jesus followers, and her as a traditional person of Islamic faith, are combating the same issues.
Yeah.
People wanting to restrict curriculum in schools, people wanting to force women into subjugation, or to take away rights of LGBTQ individuals. And if the importance that we come together and work together on these issues, even though, we come from different faith traditions, these are so important, and we need to cooperate. So let's look back at the biblical text. We're going to read Genesis 25, starting in verse 8, and I'll read verse 9 as well. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Verse 9. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him. What I want you to talk about is the point that in our upbringing, we were taught that Ishmael and Hagar went away. Mm-hmm. And from that point forward, after Isaac was born, they were not mentioned. They were not part of the story. They were not part of the promise. They were not part of anything.
Right.
And what we see in our very own biblical text is that the sons of Abraham come together to bury their father.
Yeah. And there's other evidence to suggest that their presence exists, maybe not directly, but after Abraham's wife and the mother of Isaac, Sarah, dies, then we see them gravitating towards the land where Ishmael has been exiled. And Abraham continues to get closer and closer to those lands. And it's almost as though he was seeking out repentance for previous decisions. And so when he dies and Isaac and Ishmael come together to bury their father, it's probably one of the most beautiful and complete narratives, or ending to a narrative, that's in the entirety of Scripture.
Right. And I remember when you and I talked about this years ago, and not ever having, and again, I have not read through the entire book of Genesis, clearly my mistake, but not knowing that this in fact did happen. But I think it is such a great example of what I was saying before I read the scripture, that we need to come together in the same way that the sons of Abraham did. To what degree they had interaction throughout their life, we don't know.
Right.
However, they came together to honor their father in the end. We need to come together as people of faith to enact in the way that we feel that Jesus led us to, that the people of Islam feel that Muhammad led them to, as people of liberation, as people of love, as people of grace, as people of mercy, and fight for those who don't have a voice.
Well said. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, two brothers who are the descendants of these two great faiths, or three great faiths within the world today, come to honor their father, their ancestor, but also to bring about peace. Mm-hmm. For that is what the laying of the dead is, to bring about an eternal peace. And that is one of the things I think that we can glean from this story. The Abrahamic faiths have the potential to bring about eternal peace for the entire world, if they dare to do it.
We just got to figure out how to get people to give up power and control.
Well, that's not so easy, Missy.
That's a topic we'll keep tackling. I tell you what, when that happens, when these three faiths come together and bring about world peace, there will be no more need for our voices.
That's
no
right.
more need for this podcast.
We will have our last episode.
That's right.
As soon as we are able to announce that.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this interview with Ani. I do feel like we will have continued conversations with her. I found our time together fascinating, and I definitely want to learn more.
Yeah, in a couple of weeks, not next week's episode, but the week after that, I'll give a report after attending the event there in New York City. I'm really looking forward to it.
Excellent.
Well, until next week, stay tuned and keep living good faith.
You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.